Hello, everyone. Welcome to the EA Global Summit 2020. We are in day 5 of the summit. We had 4 fabulous days with several interesting presentations and several interesting conversations happening in our channel. We thank you all for your support for the last 4 days, and we look forward to having you in today's sessions as well. So this is Nizam from the organizing team. And today with us, we have Rudy Claes, who is the Senior Solution Architect and Enterprise Architect. He'll be talking about scaled agile framework and how it could be done using Sparx Enterprise Architect. So just a quick note on questions regarding these sessions or having a discussion with Rudy post this session. Please join our Teams channel, the link to which will be shared in the chat window if you haven't done already. And if you have any difficulties joining the channel, please do let us know. You will see several interesting conversations happening there, and Rudy will be requesting Rudy to be available in the channel to have a discussion with you post the conference as well. So once again, welcome everyone, and thanks Rudy for joining us today. Over to you now.
Okay, good morning, everyone. A warm welcome from Belgium, Europe. So depending on your time zone, a good morning, good afternoon, or even a late good night. So my name is Rudy Klaas. I work for Innocom as a Senior Solution and Enterprise Architect. We are a Belgium-based consultancy firm specializing in enterprise architecture, agile coaching, strategic advisory, and road mapping. As such, it is my pleasure to introduce you to the Safe Agile Architecture Toolkit for Sparx, which resulted from work in the field, working with enterprise architecture, working with Safe, doing projects, resulting in this toolkit. So I'll be introducing Safe, also a practical approach towards Agile architecture, the importance of modeling and tool support, and how Sparx can realize this via an MDG. So I'm not assuming any prior knowledge of SAFE, but do note, due to the time constraints, I'll be only be able to scratching the surface. But in the presentation, I've added a lot of hyperlinks towards useful resources so that you can dive in depth at your own pace on that topic. I will be also focusing on the architecture part of SAFE. So other roles are of course there and are equally important. But for this conversation, it will be having the focus on Agile architecture and how it's implemented in SAFE. And of course, last but not least, how we can leverage our preferred Sparx to work in this context. So the agenda. So first up, a general introduction to SAFE, how Agile architecture is implemented in that context, and the importance SAFE gives to modeling and tool support, leading to the introduction of that SAFE Agile Architecture Toolkit for Sparx. I'll be giving an overview. And then for those who are already knowledgeable about SAFE and had the opportunity to follow the SAFE Agile Architecture training course, I'll be following the same table of contents as in that course, and I'll be using the case study in that training in Sparx. So you should have a reference on how things were done during the course on paper on the whiteboard. As compared to how you could do things in Sparx. As such, we'll be discussing in turn aligning architecture with business value, developing solution vision, solution intent and roadmaps, supporting the program increment, PIs, planning and execution, and last but not least, supporting new strategic teams and value streams. I'll be also discussing about the next steps I would like to take with this, towards the toolkit, publishing that, sharing that with you guys, and also the next steps towards adding some more enterprise architecture into the framework and the toolkit. So first up, SAFe. What is SAFe? It's a popular topic nowadays, surely in Agile, scaled Agile context. We've been doing a lot of projects during the last years with that framework, gaining experience, also with other frameworks, but we noticed that this one is surely getting a critical mass and has the potential to become rather dominant in the scaled Agile framework ecospace. SAFe, as it is defined, top right, SAFe for Lean Enterprises is a knowledge base of proven integrated principles, practices, and competencies for achieving business agility using Lean, Agile, and DevOps. And so that's a lot. And it's also based on practice, on experience. So just as, for instance, for those having my age and being confronted with something like RUP, Rational Unified Process at the time, same deal happened over here. A lot of practical experience compiled into a framework, allowing you to put it into practice. And that's something that I, as a practitioner, really like to do. So scaled Agile and framework, what are those things then? So first, it is scaled. So it targets enterprise scope. So business, IT, the complete enterprise is being targeted. And as such, it has configurations. Usually, to scare you off, things are being shown with a rather intimidating infographic about SAFe with lots of nuts and bolts, but I'm not going to do that. So the configurations basically allow you to tailor SAFe to any context. So, and based on that, applying SAFe in that context is actually what you should be doing. So essential, portfolio, large solution, and full SAFe are available. But do note, just as with other process frameworks, you can tailor them to your concrete needs in your project context, in your enterprise context, and start using that accordingly. So it's very flexible, and scaling means right sizing for your concrete purpose. That's an important property of the framework. Of course, it's all about Agile. Not only Agile, also principles of Lean are being operated in that framework, and also it is very much oriented towards DevOps and applying that way of working in your organization to gain agility in delivering software just in time where you need it and by who are in need of it. The framework itself is also in evolution, constant evolution. So the current version is 5.0, launched in January 2020. It's being supported by an interesting website with a lot of interesting content, and I've got some references to that. On the bottom of the slide, source relates to those things. It's also a commercial framework, so it's not free. But does that mean that while there are trainings, certifications available, publications, they also organize conferences. So by that, there is backing support by a community. The Scaled Agile Incorporated is the firm that captures that and publishes that Scaled Agile framework, but it is being backed up by currently 350 plus partners, a lot of contributors from those partners, and there's also an active community platform contributing things to the SAFe ecosystem, and Inocom is one of those partners. So it's very active, very interesting, and let's see what it's capable of doing. So rather big slide over here, not to scare you off, but there are some principles that are incorporated in the Agile Architecture Toolkit for SAFe in Sparx, and those things are really hooked up to the framework. So when you're considering Agile architecture in a SAFe context, And the article being referenced over there illustrates a bit more how SAFe looks at Agile architecture. There are three important building blocks. There are collaborations really necessary between people, as always, but really dominant in the framework. There are a lot of values that you should adhere to, and a lot of practices, best practices, and also from experience, things that work out well in the context of SAFe that you should apply in your own SAFe implementation. So as such, the bullet points on the slide underlined, those contain hyperlinks to articles on the SAFe website, talk about a bit more in depth about those topics. I'll be briefly leafing through them, but you can find them on that site. So the homepage of scaled-framework.com is over here, and it's really interactive. So you can click around on the framework or select a framework configuration, for instance, the full SAFe or the essential SAFe, and then clicking through on those things will lead you in the right direction. For instance, in the full SAFe, the role of an enterprise architect, and you're directed towards enterprise architect as a role, and then you can click on the links and see how things are done. There's also an interesting search box, so Agile architecture in SAFe, for instance, a topical discussion for now, and then you're directed to that article, also with a lot of infographics, and on the bottom of each article, interesting references to more information, and also kudos to other things, for instance, like the Agile Manifesto and other publications. So that's the way they organize things, and it's constantly updated. So that's an interesting and free source of information that you can use to your advantage. So back to Agile architecture and how it's considered in SAFe. So first and foremost, there is a really push towards maintaining the main principle of Agile, and that's decentralized decision making. So you should empower teams, Scrum teams, to make their own choices, empower them, having them implement their features by breaking them down in stories and enabler stories. And based on that, you're up and running. SAFe, the scalability, adds on top of that a lot of interesting features in the framework to allow for that scalability. And of course, with scalability, there's sizing. So an architecture sync is really important to see it going on in the infographic top left. There is a lot of coming on between the various roles that SAFe defines. And as an architect, one of your primary functions is communication. And as such, you should be doing that also in this SAFe context with those other roles. Also, the architecture sync means that architects themselves organize themselves in a community and start sharing information, start governing that, not in a classical governance board, but more in a sync and governance approach to allow for that decentralized decision making and that agility to take place. Other principles and values, middle top, assume variability and preserve of options, a really important aspect in SAFe. It means as an architect, you always have options, solution candidates, you need to evaluate, and driving that, and based on insight and oversight and details and decisions, you can make the optimal choice at a point in time, syncing that with the other things that are going on in the SAFe context should allow you to evolve towards an optimal solution, given the best parameters available. It also advocates the usage of building incrementally with fast integrated learning cycles. So whatever you do in the team context and things on top of that, as an architect in a team, as a system architect, or on top of that as a solution architect and even as an enterprise architect. And those are the 3 roles bottom left that you see being defined in SAFe. They should be aware that learn fast or otherwise fail fast, learn from that, evolve on that, optimize on that, and have your architecture evolve over time, providing the best support towards the feature that it needs to sustain. As such, there is a concept being defined, middle to the right, the architectural runway. You can compare it with a runway or a railway, and that the you create to have an aeroplane take off. The size of the airplane decides upon the length of that runway. So the heavier the plane, a big 747 needs a lot more runway than a small Cessna, and as such, the feature it needs to support are being backed up as an architect by you in the form of enablers at various levels, at enterprise architecture level, at solution architecture level, and at system architecture level, which means that Epic's capabilities, features, and also stories are being backed up by you as an architect at those various levels by means of enablers. And by implementing those enablers beforehand, they are able to support future features, creating enough railway, enough context, enough things that provide for a solid foundation of execution so that your features are able to be implemented in the future sprints and PIs. As such, and it's not the last topic, but surely the one of the most interesting ones, bottom right, balancing intentional architecture with emergent design is also a very important practice in SAFe, safeguarding the agility of the framework. It actually means that you should have enough intentional architecture up front, so not a big upfront design, but just enough architecture, and then delegating these things downstream towards the teams via your solution architect, via your system architects, so the teams themselves can focus on implementing stuff. And from that and those insights, they will give feedback on the design they've been using, and linking that to architecture is really key to the success of realizing a agile architecture in the context of SAFe. Of course, how much intentional architecture is enough? There's an interesting story about that, stating, well, you could comparing to making toast. You put a slice of bread in the toaster, you wait until it turns black, starts smoking and starts smelling funny, and then you subtract 20 seconds. Something like that is also in the context of just enough architecture. So experience is there, but don't over-engineer it. And so, but you will see in time what enough intentional architecture is required to support and to delegate others. For me, it's also a learning curve. I was being introduced to this framework middle in 2017, and also as a company, Innocom, we also evolved in that time frame with the usage of SAFe, gaining our own experiences, and also as architects. So I can also share some things about that on the teams later on. But do note there is a learning curve you've got, but you're not alone. There are others that have gone the same path that you're embarking on or are currently following upon. So let's share some information about that. It will be for the benefit of all of us. So these are the principles, so practices, values, and collaborations in that SAFe agile architecture context that are really interesting and important to have that also being incorporated in the Sparx toolkit. So what about modeling and tool support then? One of the things I really like about SAFe is the fact that it has very clear statements about the features of modeling and tool support, how they look and how they look at documentation. So one of the things they advocate, and there are some quotes on this slide. So favoring models over documents. Of course, that comes from Agile Manifesto, but is incorporated in the SAFe framework. And also there's an interesting quote, when in doubt, model it out. So as an architect, your primary architecture tool is a whiteboard. Start doing some model storming, capture that, and then open up your favorite modeling tool, which is of course Sparx, and then capture that information inside that. As such, you'll be creating a repository of things, lists of things, relations between things, matrices, and also visualizations. Let's say the classic way TOGAF looks at it. But in an Agile context, the same thing happens. And the definition of that repository is in SAFe called solution intent. So, and the idea is that, as you see on the infographic top left, and that the specifications, the design, and the tests that you're capturing should be part of that repository of things. The current state, the future state, and how you evolve from a rather variable solution intent with some uncertainty, some questions, some issues even that needs resolving, attention. And as an architect, you're constantly working on those things to stabilize things. So in time, within your project context, that solution intent evolves from variable to fixed. And from that, you can empower your teams and other roles to get that solution being built in the right direction, delivering the right amount of value at the right point in time. So as such, bottom right, you see that solution intent evolves through collaboration. It's rarely, and good architecture never has been invented behind a desk. Good architecture has always been invented standing in front of a whiteboard, interacting with others, peer reviewing with others, being challenged with that, gaining insight, gaining oversight, talking to people, capturing new insights and incorporating that into your architecture. As such, keeping options open with fixed and variable solution intent is also a very important aspect of the framework that, as a principle stated on the previous slide, you've got options you can evaluate, and there are some parameters you are going to use, like cost, like risk, like priority, things I will be discussing a bit later downstream in the presentation. But keeping your options open and making the best decision at that point in time, given the information you've got and the constraints and the concerns that are over there, are the things you should be doing as an architect and also in the context of SAP. As such, the amount of documentation you're supposed to create in an Agile context, and is not different in the context of SAFe, as it is highlighted top left on the slide, is creating minimal but sufficient documentation, model first. And that is where the model-based systems engineering discipline kicks in, that exploring alternatives and learning faster, generating documentation, build model quality in, supporting compliance and impact analysis based upon the model. That sounds as music in our ears as Sparx fans, is something which is also very clearly stated by the framework. As such, the things you're doing in this context, translating vision, and first and foremost, talking about non-functionals, identifying enablers, and hooking those things up to the capabilities, features, and stories at those various levels are the things you're going to do with a good backing up of modeling and tool support. As such, of course, the question rises, okay, what is currently in the ecosystem in the context of SAFe? So, and also, what is SAFe really stating? I've tried to visualize this on the slide, stating that basically the SAFe framework, as it is in its current state, is really focusing on who does what, when, and for sure why. It makes clear statements about the things that you should be doing, what you should be doing, when you should be doing it, and also very dominantly on why you should be doing it. And that's an interesting feature of the framework, and in my opinion, a reason why it became popular. But as such, it does not yet contain a lot of how you should be doing these. Of course, there are some best practices and some techniques that are present, but surely towards how we should be doing things towards architecture, there is still room for innovation and insights and improvement. As such, also the question with what you should be doing things, to that end, SAFe doesn't make clear decisions or is being supported by a standardized tool platform. Of course, there are tools in the ecosystem of SAFe. They are also labeled as a bottom right, and Scaled Agile platform is there, and there are a lot of partners offering tools. But for the most part, they are really focusing on collaboration on top of tools we already know, like Atlassian Jira, Atlassian Confluence. There are some partners building on top of that and offering their solution. There are others really innovating on that, but it's basically web-based collaboration. Of course, collaboration and communication is key and SAFe, but it doesn't really identify yet what you should be using as modeling tools. And then, of course, there is room for opportunity. And then being confronted with that, I guess, okay, given this, what would be my choice of modeling tool that I would like to be using in this context? And after giving it some great thoughts, let's say 5 to 10 seconds, I decided, okay, let's open Sparx and start seeing what we can do with it. As such, I've been using Sparx in this context for quite some time on some projects, and also saw that there are some things that can and should be repeated, some patterns, some practices, and I decided to capture them in that SAFe Agile Architecture toolkit for Sparx as an MDG. Note that it's a toolkit. I'll be leveraging a bit more on that in the course of this presentation. It's an MDG. Also, I find very important to share this with peers, and I'll also be very happy to share this with you through this interesting conference and the collaboration platform. For that, once again, big thanks for having that opportunity, and a cheerio to the team for organizing this in such a professional way. So I will be posting the slides together with the MDG and also that reference case from that training on the platform after this presentation. But it's not the only thing that is interesting, because of course in our Sparx ecosystem there are more interesting tools available. And let's say on the border between modeling and collaboration, we've got our WebPA and also of course Prolaborate. And I think there are a lot of interesting things that we can do in that SAFe Agile architecture context with those tools. And for sure, I've been thinking about and even dreaming about interesting Prolaborate dashboards. So Prolaborate guys, if you're hearing this, I'll be making some requests, feature requests in due time to see what we can do with that platform. But I'm pretty sure that based on a repository, web-based publication, and web-based dashboarding and insights and collaboration is really key to success of any project using that tool set, and it will be also in the context of SAFe. So, okay, let's see what we can do with it, how it looks like, and how we can translate the how and the with what of SAFe by using Sparx. So the toolkit. First and foremost, it's a toolkit. It's not a framework on itself. It blends in with what SAFe as a framework has to offer, focusing on the Agile architecture part towards modeling, and in the near future also on publication on that repository, for instance with Prolaborate. Let's first focus on the task at hand. How can you leverage modeling in this interesting SAFe context? let's look at how SAFe defines things. So the SAFe big picture, and the best way to scare people away from the framework is showing something like this. Agilists will turn green and start yelling a framework in Agile context. That's not going to happen. And also when you show this to any management level kind of figure, doing all this at the same time on a complete organization, that's not feasible in our organization. We're not going to do this. So introducing SAFe is, let's say, an art by itself. Right? So Agile coaches introducing SAFe, there are techniques for that, a lot of experience with that. But do note, it's not that big framework that encapsulates all. It's practices, applying them, and growing on that. So slowly but surely, you'll be drawn into how SAFe looks at things. And based on that and that experience, you'll see that it actually holds a lot of value. And then you can start living these things in their proper context. As it was the case with, let's say, Scrum some 10 years back in my personal experience. And it also happened, let's say, 15 years back with something like Rational Unified Process. Same deal, so nothing new underneath the sun. And it's a proven approach, that the framework approach, not the big bang approach, but let's say the lean and mean approach is the best way to go about it. But as such, of course, the toolkit itself needs to reflect all things that are available in the framework that SAFe is. So hence, to the right side of this slide, you see the two toolboxes. So I've created two diagrams, one generic one and one dedicated towards the portfolio canvas. That's the one to the right. And the one left to that is the generic toolbox, and it mimics how SAFe looks at things. Hence, you've got the SAFe portfolio, the SAFe large solution, the SAFe essential, and there are some relationships, dependency oriented for starters, but we could consider other things. But I was not too keen on detailing out and stereotyping relationships yet, but we'll see how things evolve. And do note it's a 1.0, so do expect some evolution in that over time. But still, I think based on this, we can get things going. As such, all these elements are available in the MDG for your usage. But as always, good Pareto states that with 20% of this, you'll be doing 80% of your work, and that's not different in this context. So let's see how we can start using this in the Agile architecture context. A couple of design decisions I've made, and one of the things I came to realize was quickly that, okay, a SAFe toolkit, and as such, it is that blue block middle on the top of the slide. That's your support towards the SAFe framework in the form of that toolkit, that toolbox, those diagrams, allowing to leverage and implement, model out those SAFe topics in the context of Sparx. Agile architecture hooked up to that. You've got inputs from other roles for sure. Those epics, those capabilities, those features are being defined, and you as an architect at those various levels are asked to back those up by the proper epic enablers, capability and feature enablers, and story enablers. And then it's up to you to translate that into the proper enterprise and solution architecture. And if you're acting as a system architect in the team context, you're translating that even further towards a proper design and hooking that back up towards the architectural, intentional architecture that was there, and some guardrails to give you some degrees of freedom. But those are the things you're doing. As such, it would be a bit inappropriate and for sure inflexible to select a language or a framework and state this is the thing you should be doing with Agile architecture. As well, one of the principles in agility is freedom of choice, but of course then converging on that. But still, depending on the way of working, I've seen various organizations applying Agile architecture in their proper context, in a modeling context that was different from the others. So, and as such, I think the toolkit should account for that. I've tried to visualize this on the slide to make my case on that. So lighter green on the left, you see things that are really focusing on the modeling language or languages itself. Darker green to the right, you see the dominance popping up of the context in which you apply that thing or those things. That is to say, the framework in question. And in our Sparx context, of course, we've got a wealth of opportunities. So I've listed a couple of things that I found interesting. There are others, so it's not limited. So should you have ideas on that, thoughts about that, feel free to share them through the collaboration platform after this presentation or even later. It is an interesting discussion we could have. What I saw handy for starters was, let's say, the classic approach on things, the multi-language approach that Sparx, of course, supports, using a couple of languages and making choices on Archimate, BPMN, UML, ERD, and others, and assigning those to the proper roles and blending them together in a set of viewpoints and an organizational structure in your repository. That's a very classic approach, and there are frameworks supporting that in the Sparx context. But still, it is really focused on the languages and their respective viewpoints, and it's up to you to blend them together in, let's say, what is the context, the framework you're going to use it. For sure, you could use an architecture language like Archimate as, let's say, your graphical table of contents, gluing all those languages together, and that's an interesting approach. So that approach really blends with how SAFe looks at things and how it allows you to implement your Agile architecture. So that's option number one, but it's not the only one. For instance, there's also, and far more recently, due to the evolution the language has undergone, Archimate is, well, fit for purpose to be a one-stop shop for all things architecture has a need for. So single language is also an option you could pursue and link up towards your SAFe toolkit. Of course, there is less degrees of freedom, but there are lots of viewpoints in the language allowing you to model out whatever you need. And there is a bit more context, but still not yet an actual framework telling you should be using these viewpoints and that viewpoint in this context, and gluing things together. Has been done in the language for sure in version 2, but version 3 and evolutions on that allowed a bit more freedom and focused on, okay, pick and choose and organize for versatility and also for agility. But still, that framework was a bit less dominantly present over there. As such, there is also always room for an opportunity and an evolution on that. And for instance, in the context of Sparx, there has been an introduction by Eero, very knowledgeable about Archimate, and also published a lot of interesting best practices about Archimate. And he has created an enterprise architecture framework based on the sole use of Archimate, and it's called the Lean Enterprise Architecture Framework, for short, LEAF. You can find it also on the Sparx community site. And it's also an interesting candidate if you're deciding, okay, Archimate is a language I like, but I also like a framework governing that, giving some more stability and hands-on support towards the people using it, then that is an interesting thing you could evaluate. As such, the framework approach is there more dominantly present, but it's still focused on the language it's being backed up with, in this case, Archimate. Moving towards the actual frameworks approach, there's also an interesting thing called C4, the C4 model. Simon Brown has introduced 4 viewpoints and is not really too much focused on how you visualize those viewpoints. There are various options from stencils in drawing tools towards things in modeling tools, and there's also an interesting MDG present and offered by Liber on the Sparx ecosystem that allows you to blend in your C4 inside your Sparx context. Also, other frameworks, things like Labla, for instance, are also interesting to check out, even more dominantly on the end-to-end approach. But there is for sure a link between the SAFe toolkit that can be made over there, and there might be others you could be thinking of. As such, the SAFe toolkit decouples itself from the underlying implementation, and through the linkage that, of course, Sparx elegantly offers, you're able to implement that. Then, of course, the question arises, should I be mix and mingling things, delegating the actual choice to the architects? I think in experience, it's best that you make a choice about using one or another approach and implement that in a consequent fashion, because too many degrees of freedom are not that interesting. But of course, within a certain context, you could decide that a certain viewpoint having a need for an interesting system context can lead to a PowerPoint, something I do on a very frequently basis, backed up by the proper models in Sparx. Could also be a system context in C4. So it depends upon the circumstance, but let's decide that you agree on the things you're going to use as an architect or the team of architects in the proper context, or at an organizational level, make up your mind about how you're going to implement Agile architecture as a practice in your organization, and publish some guidelines and also offer some guidance on the usage of those things. But as such, the SAFe toolkit has that freedom in it to hook itself up to all those possible implementations. Okay, a lot of PowerPoint stuff for now, so time to evolve towards our preferred modeling tool, Sparx. So first up, let's see what we can do, or what we should be doing in the context of SAFe as an architect. And top-level enterprise architects are being asked to cooperate and align architecture with business value. If one thing is key in SAFe, it's value-driven. So it's really focused on delivering the right amount of value within the proper time frame towards the right amount of stakeholders. That's really key to any Agile project. That's why we invented Agile and Scrum in the first place. And it's also dominantly present in this context. Of course, scaling out things enterprise-wide, of course, has some weight to it, but still, it is really feasible. And how it's done is that, well, first and foremost, SAFe organizes itself around value streams. Value streams being backed up or as a realization of a clear vision hooked up to strategic teams and a strategy your enterprise has to define and implement. And of course, there are some external factors, as you might know, in that context, like government, regulations, what competitors are doing. So you've got a lot of external factors and internal factors driving that strategy that you're going to implement as an organization. Backed up by this, SAFe is there to give you guidance and state, okay, organize yourself in value streams. Based on that, hook up strategic teams through a portfolio vision to that, and get that agility inside those operational value streams by defining what is known as Agile release trains and a solution train on top of that if things are implemented in a large-scale fashion. How does this look like in SAFe? Let's take a brief look, and then how it's done in, or could be done, how it could be done in Sparx. So one of the things SAFe states, okay, let's create a vision as a postcard from the future. Wish we were here to obtain the results, but indeed aspirational, yet realistic and achievable, and motivational enough to engage others on that journey. Based on that, there is an implementation of the business model canvas inside the SAFe context, and they called it the portfolio canvas. But if you're accustomed to working with business model canvases, that's really okay. It's really a copy-paste affair. So first thing that is interesting over there is that the value proposition is being expressed as there are value streams available there, realizing that, making that proposition concrete, offering concrete solutions to our respective customers through our channels, creating the required amount of relationships within the guardrails of budgets being monitored by KPIs. As such, defining your key partners, key activities, key resources, your cost structure, and your revenue streams are things you're doing at that portfolio level, that corporate level. And you as enterprise architect are being asked to participate with that. As such, you can start defining the value streams, helping them out. But as an enterprise architect, you're asked to, okay, how can we support these things by means of enterprise architecture? So the value streams are here in darker green. Value stream talks about, okay, what are the activities we should be doing to yield a certain value. Value, of course, can be expressed in a dollar amount or a euro amount, but it can also be something else in a non-profit context. But there is something that triggers it. There are activities being done by the people in various roles, executing those tasks, yielding the proper result. As such, that operational value stream needs to be backed up by proper IT in the form of applications being solidly founded through an interesting level of enterprise architecture, leading to the proper solution architecture and implementation of those things. And as such, SAFe defines development value streams for that. So a development value stream leads to applications, systems you're developing, custom built, you're acquiring and start configuring, start tailing them, or even start using them in a SaaS context, whatever works out well. And then those are things you decide upon as an architect. What is fit for purpose are the things you should be using in backing up that operational value stream through development value streams. And that's one of the core principles of SAFe. Let's see how it is implementable in Sparx. So the first thing you could do is translate that portfolio vision in Sparx by using the toolbox with the SAFe portfolio canvas. And then you can just, using a template, you're not going to win a beauty contest with this, but think about something in Prolaborate, for instance, that visualizes nicely and allows web publication, or maybe an alternate view in Sparx. Publishing that through web or WebPA would yield interesting result, and that people are drawn to it and see what's on it. First and foremost, there are those value streams. Delivering the solutions our enterprise needs to make up for the business it tries to envision and realize. Based on this, there are some elements on the canvas, but for us architects, those value streams are really important to understand them, how they function, what they are be doing. So that's something you're doing as enterprise architects, focusing on business architecture. And as such, in that case study, in the training, there is detailing out of an operational value stream in the context of self-driving vehicles, delivering goods on demand to people, requesting them by usage of their smartphone. That's in a nutshell the case study in the training. So you can depict it as such in Sparx with the usage of the generic toolbox. So, and you see with 20% of those elements, you're good to go. And what's depicted over here is the operational value stream, broken down in those parts that comprise of it. So receiving delivery order, and then route order for fulfillment, dispatching the vehicle, fulfilling an order, collecting payment. That's a thing that happens in that operational value stream that autonomous delivery program realizes. There's something that triggers that, the customer requesting for such a vehicle, and is of course at the end a delivery of that vehicle and support required to sustain that product in the field. As such, we need support by our IT organization to make this happen, to support this via IT, and doing things. And before we end up in teams implementing those features required to support all these activities, there is a notion of an an agile release train. An agile release train is a concept that SAFe introduces that with a team of 25 to 125 people, you organize yourself in a set of teams, Scrum teams, and you're focusing on some area inside this context. And that context is then the Agile release train, being empowered to deliver the right amount of value through IT support, in the sense that there are applications and systems being allocated to it. And I've added them to the release trains. So, and I've used some Archimate for that, but do note there are other languages you could use. So, for instance, in the context of the Agile release train for the consumer solutions, there is a CRM system, there is customer experience management, and there is order management being allocated to that, which means that the teams inside that are empowered to build the features and break those things down in stories. In the context of sprints and a PI comprise a couple of months, realizing the right amount of value in need of this operational value stream. And the development value stream is then the thing that realizes this, preferably in a DevOps kind of context. You can also acquire solutions in a classical fashion, and there's also an interesting combination bimodal, for instance, that some of your organizational structures are using waterfall kind of techniques, blueprint kind of techniques, SAP, for instance, CRM systems, all the suppliers work like that, but there's interesting alignment between the two possible. But for sure, the idea is to do this in an agile context. And also, these things happen for the other arts. So mapping the application landscape you've got to the release trains is something as an architect you're asked to do. Of course, if you've got a really large application landscapes comprising of a couple of hundreds of applications, of course, you're talking about domains and subdomains and allocating packages of applications inside that context, but Sparx is perfectly suited to that task by decomposing things and following an hierarchical structure. You're able to translate your application landscape in the context of SAFe, in that context of Agile release trains, supporting in turn those operational value streams. And that's the link between the portfolio level, the portfolio canvas, also the capabilities that are there, and also other things that are over there. But deliberately, SAFe has chosen to safeguard agility. Let's hook up applications and systems directly towards those operational and development value streams and organize yourself accordingly in Agile teams, being part of Agile release trains supporting this. Value streams, for instance, a link to another diagram. Of course, there are a couple of them in the context of that example. The Terrific Transport Corporation defines 4 value streams at a given point in time. So the truck program, the van program, the autonomous vehicle program are there, and it focuses on the autonomous delivery program as the new kid on the block. As such, they are also accompanied by the right level of context and strategic level of information captured in what is known as strategic teams. So strategic teams are being distilled from strategy, workshops, and talking to management level, translating what we should be doing and why we are doing what we're doing, really comprise into a set of teams that are linked to those operational value streams, allowing you to give the right amount of priority and funding to those things. As such, the lean portfolio management discipline is there to help us out with that, but it's a bit outside the context of this talk. But do check this out. It's a really important topic, and as an enterprise architect, you should be knowledgeable about how these things work in practice because you're asked to participate in that. As a solution architect, you're backing up that enterprise architecture by translating those things to the right amount of solutions and having them implemented by your system architects in the context of those arts. As such, vision is interesting to clarify. For instance, here you've got a portfolio vision stating, okay, I'm going to do this in this context. This is our vision, the postcard of the future, and this is what we should be striving towards in our architecture. The architecture itself, of course, is there. And let me reflect on towards how the toolkit looks at it. Yes, so how your target architecture, your project start architecture, your architecture vision looks like, well, pick and choose one of these and implement it accordingly. So in Sparx, for instance, looking at the autonomous delivery program, okay, how is this then backed up by the proper amount of architecture? Let's see in the solution roadmap. You see, okay, we've got the solution vision, the solution context. We've got the solution train comprising those Agile release trains. And in that context, we can start defining our solution architecture. Solutions by themselves, which were also present on the portfolio canvas, are the unit of delivery that a solution train needs to deliver. So every thing upon that solution train is asked, okay, what is your contribution? What is your solution you're going to deliver? And as such, of course, in the context of a time frame, the roadmap is there to help you out to translate that as a solution architect to the right amount of capabilities and features backing that up. For instance, over here, a preview of the solution roadmap. I'm going to talk that more to discuss it a bit more in detail later on, but let me quickly leave on that towards the architecture vision. And I chose to implement it in good old-fashioned Archimate. So over here, you see the architecture vision, what we need to deliver in a time frame, which is then backed up by the proper roadmap and being broken down to what that means for the different players on the field in their arts. capabilities and features, and the teams empowered to translate those towards the right amount of features and enablers. As an architect, you're asked to support for that. So as such, a system context at this level talks about, okay, what do we have? Those things colored in darker blue. What do we need? Those things identified in lighter green. Okay, so we're talking about fleet management, something we need to add. CRM and some capabilities we need to add. There is parcel management, inventory management, customer experience management we need to add or extend. Fulfillment is also targeted. And there are some existing systems that are capable of supporting that and integrating with that. As such, this is the first intervention you've got as a solution architect to, comprise, how can we translate that enterprise architecture towards solution architecture level and empower the right amount of people to actually start realizing this. Also interesting to note that the mapping of systems to the operational value stream, what do we have, for instance, existing, what do we need, for instance, prefixed by new, and how they relate to the various value streams can also be easily done by our good old-fashioned matrix approach, good old-fashioned TOGAF in the context of Sparx, the relationship matrix. So it's not only visualizations, matrices are also very handy to and also to create the right amount of connections between those things. And also you should be aware not to duplicate information, but for sure the architecture is created in Sparx, but other things like epics, like capabilities, like features, we can import them in our Sparx context, hyperlink them with things like Confluence and Jira. So don't shovel and duplicate data, but link and intertwine. That's the thing that helps out really fine in this context. Also identifying some stakeholders on the board is interesting to hook them up to the applications. And then as applications are hooked up to those arts and development value streams, you have a solid foundation for execution to start realizing this in the proper context. So that's kicking back from the solution context, being this is all what is what it's all about: internal factors, external factors. Your solution vision. This is what we're going to do. We're going to break it down in these arts comprising of themes, and then we're good to go. Next up is, how are we going to do this planning wise? Because of course, everything in Agile needs to be planned and also be documented. And those are the two common misconceptions. We don't need to do a lot of planning. We don't need to do a lot of documentation. Yes, you do, but in a different fashion. Let's see how SAFe looks at those things. So more information about this in the framework as identified earlier in the presentation. I don't have room to scale across the complete SAFe, but it's really interesting to know that as an enterprise architect, there's a lot of common ground you're touching with others. So do read upon these things, or if you've got experience on that, feel free to share some experiences with that. Let's move on. So, having that vision, that postcard from the future allows us to see, this is where we're going towards. How are we going to do that? SAFe states, plain old Agile sprints. A set of sprints is what is called then a program increment or a PI. And a set of PIs is then the recurring theme in your planning to move forward. And very importantly, to align the various players on the board, but inspect and adapt at certain points in time, you're aligning the cadence of the various arts inside your solution context. That's important that retrospectives at sprint level, at program level, at portfolio level are really embedded in the framework to allow for inspect and adapt, troubleshooting, reprioritization, all those good things from Agile are being scaled out across the framework. By doing that, as an architect, you of course are asked to actively participate in these things by using your solution intent, having the right solution context in your mind. You're able to translate the solution vision inside the context of that solution backlog. Backlog is nothing new in Agile, so there are backlogs at various levels in the framework, portfolio, solution, and team. And portfolio comprises of the epics. The solution backlog comprises of the capabilities and features. And of course, the team backlog comprises of the stories. Backing that up by the right amount of enablers is the thing you should be doing as an architect. Remember that metaphor of that architectural runway. That's the thing that fuels the architecture, that lays the right amount of foundation to have that set of features, set of capabilities, that epic being implemented in the right fashion, and allows you as an IT organization to be flexible enough to support that and keep on supporting that in that context. So solution vision, solution intent are interesting concepts. And there's in the roadmap, let's say the time aspect, because of course architecture is also time aware. So it needs to align itself to, okay, when do we need to deliver things at the right point in time to have those enablers actually supporting that set of features on top of them. So hence road mapping. SAFe talks about roadmaps in that context and states, okay, you're going to have a roadmap at portfolio level, translating that to solution level, translating that to PI level, and those are hooked up together. So a lot of planning and planning capabilities are there. So let's say planners inside SAFe are really busy doing things, working with those various roles to get things aligned in the proper time frame, and of course having that funded with the right amount of budgets to get things going. As such, as an architect, you're asked to actively participate with this, and you're going to do that, of course, by means of aligning those features, those capabilities, those epics, and those stories with the proper level of enablers in the right context. Let's see how we can do this in the context of Sparx. So the roadmap itself, you see a preview of that. Let's open it up. The solution roadmap is covering the complete solution and talks about the longer term. So year one, first half year, year one, the second one, and then the third one, and then you're moving forward on that. But you try to commit on the things that are earlier in time, and you're going to look forward to the things that are a bit later in time, and that's a classic approach. That's not different in the context of SAFe. So let's open it up. I chose to use a simple swim lanes and matrix approach. So something you can also save as a profile in Sparx. That's a fun way of doing that, and start reusing that, templating that. Once again, you're not going to win a beauty contest with this one also. But, well, let's say an interesting Collaborate dashboard would be on my wish list to see this taking part in the publication process. The thing you're going to do is, and I'm going to open up my toolbox for that. And let's see some traceability going on. Because of course we're using a modeling tool. And so our solution train is composed of those arts. Those arts are not visible on this schematic, but the epics comprising them, they are. And on this, at this level, as an enterprise architect, solution architect, and so it's a bridge between the two and an interesting collaboration, you're going to be asked to create the right amount of epic enablers to support those epics. As an enterprise architect, you're going to initiate this. As a solution architect, you're going to make that happen. As a system architect, you're going to actually having that built and realized that there is something popping up actively supporting this solution. The actual architecture vision is there to evolve it over time, to steer it, and there are, of course, options you can evaluate, insights, and so all those good things in Agile are there. But the first thing is, okay, assisting with the definition of epics allows you to create the right amount of epic enablers. And those are then hooked up to that context. The epics themselves are there, and you can also define some milestones on that when you should be ready for an audit or a conference or a fair or whatever is there that is supporting that. This is the solution roadmap level evolving on a 6-month period. Level underneath that is the program increment roadmap or the PI roadmap. Every art has to define its roadmap and to be in line with the others to deliver the right amount of value at the right point in time. So to do that, they will define their own roadmaps. So over here, a small preview of that. So the roadmap of a PI is also a moving average, so to speak, of 3 things. The one being committed, the other being forecasted, but of course, as an architect, you're always looking forward, evaluating options, doing the things that need to be done to get this thing going. Let's open up the consumer solution roadmap. Also a basic matrix. So over here, we're talking about capabilities and features. And so capability is a set of multiple features, and a feature, of course, is something you need to have in the context of your project. And those things are being allocated to the right age or release train, so that the systems in question can be created or configured or acquired, or whatever is required. As such, as a solution architect at this level, there are some options. So solution architectures are being created, evaluated, being discussed, reviewed, funding, priority, alignment, okay, it leads to a conclusion, and that's the one you're going to implement at the right point in time. That enables you to realize those enabler features that in turn support the features in question. As an architect, of course, it's really important to have those things on the backlogs implemented in the right point in time with the right amount of detail, because you can start with a minimal viable product and evolve in that. So be sure not to go for the big bang approach, but lean and mean, the right amount of functionality, and think about evolutions and replacing things over time, evolving the architecture, working with the architecture. Those are all good things that are also very much needed in the context of SAFe. That happens for each art, and every PI, and the 3-month period, is being broken down in sprints. And in that context, you're going to be participate in that planning, the PI planning, which is a really interesting event, a 2-day event that is there, also called the big room, that yields those prioritized things and empowers the teams to start realizing those features. As such, Sparx is there to help us out with the right amount of traceability. And so my PI1 is hooked up to the right amount of features and enablers. And the PI2 and the PI3, same deal, of course. This is a forecast. This is being committed, also good practice in Agile, and hence you can move forward on that. That's how you can translate the actual work that needs to be done, architectural work that needs to be done in the form of enablers, and functional work that needs to be realized in the form of capabilities and features towards the teams, empowering them to define their stories, to define their enablers. And as a system architect, they're going to make sure that also there the balance is safeguarded between the right amount of enablers, the right amount of features, and also the right amount of technical depth that needs to be resolved. that's the capacity planning approach SAFe advises upon. Okay, so this is developing solution vision, solution intent, and roadmaps, and then things start falling into place. But of course, the actual hard work on the floor is there as an architect when you're going to support those PIs, planning them, executing them, post-evaluating them, working on those that grooming. So top left, your portfolio backlog comprises of epics. You're going to add enabler epics as an enterprise architect, having them broken down, allocated to the program backlog in the form of capabilities and features, and they're working together with solution architect. You're going to create the right amount of enablers over there, and that the same thing happens when you're going downstream from solution program backlog towards the actual team backlog, and start thinking about enabler stories and enabler stories, user stories and enablers. Of course, there's also that balance that needs to be safeguarded in the context of agile architecture, top right, because focus on features, value, that's what we're being asked to do, but we need to balance that with, okay, the right amount of foundation. Think about a solid building that starts with a solid foundation, or else it won't remain, and you will have issues from day one. Same deal happens over there. So hence, capacity allocation in the context of a PI is really important, and as an architect, you're really empowered to work on this, and you should find the right amount of balance between new features, architectural runway that needs to be implemented to support future features, and so you're looking forward to that. And technical depth and maintenance, of course, is also there. So bottom right, in any PI, there should be a balance between them. 100% new features is something you cannot keep up with because you won't have a runway in the future. So, of course, too much runway, you need to balance that, but that's a really interesting thing to see it happen in practice. And of course, technical depth and maintenance, not too much visible from business. They don't like it, they don't really care about it, but it needs to happen. So be aware that as an architect, you're actively working on that, convincing people, prioritizing on that. As an architect, you've got, let's say, a veto on that, and you can really decide, okay, this enabler should be on the backlog, or else we're in trouble. But do note that there is a really big difference, bottom left, in how you quantify, let's say, the functional things, the epics, the capabilities and features, as opposed to the enablers. And that's something we learned as an organization, also personally, that it's a different kind of thing. So what SAFe basically states, okay, use a weighted approach, which is called WSJF or WSJF, which is, let's say, user and business value, time criticality, and risk reduction and or opportunity enable, divided by job size and duration. And also that discussion is also interesting to note what are going to use as a denominator, the job size of the duration. But do note that this really works well for your blue ones on the board, not for the red ones. For the red ones, we've came to see that there is something else. Prioritizing an architecture backlog is not the same as prioritizing a feature backlog, so to speak. More on that a bit on the next slide. Also note that as an architect, you're really asked during those moments in time, surely during the events that are part of the pro increment, to really be active on the floor. So that's not the point in time to open up your Sparx and start doing things. No, that's the point in time where you should be on the floor doing things, roaming, resolving things, giving ownership. And for instance, risk roaming is really important. Resolve, own, accept, mitigate. You should be able and work your way through these things so that all the issues are off the board and all the blocks are from the way out of the way, that the trains can continue and implement the right amount of value delivered in the right amount of time. That's something you learn by experience, nothing else to it. As an architect, you will see that it's nothing new. You need to gain experience, learn from others. That's also my personal experience on that. But the more experience you've got as an architect, the more experience you've got in Agile architecture, I'm pretty sure when starting out with SAFe, you will see that you're really confident quickly with this way of working at this in this framework. Okay, practical approach towards Agile architecture as being promised in the slide deck, this introduction. Prioritizing an architectural backlog is not the same as prioritizing a backlog. And the best advice I can give you on this is take a look at risk and cost-driven architecture. It's something I have been using and we have been using as an industry for quite some time. And solution architecture was being coined and defined by Power at the time, being brought to the say, and with his risk and cost-driven architecture approach, he also won a prize on that. It's really important, interesting, important stuff, and let's say the foundation of what we do today as a solution architect in some format. So risk and cost, quantifying that should govern your architectural backlog. And bottom left, you see what it happens, let's say at the lowest level, you've got user features and defects. Those are really visible and quantifiable, and it should be used up and accompanied by the right amount of enablers, paving the way for your architectural runway and also reducing the technical debt, or also, let's say, maintenance. So that's the way Philip Cruchten at the time coined it. That's how Port incorporated in RCDA, and quantifying that is really key to that. So I really would like to invite you to take a look at that presentation on the site, and there's also an interesting video of that. Explaining what it means to do these things in the proper context, and also linking it up to the context of SAFe. Also in the context of a bimodal approach. So top left, you see development traditional and Agile, and architecture traditional and Agile. Well, they're different things, but you can combine them. And sometimes you have to combine them. Currently, my current client is doing 30% scaled Agile and 70% optimized waterfall. That's a given. Are evolving in that time frame, but still we're combining things, and that is combinable. And RCDA is there to help you out with. Port also more recently, so I put up the link towards his 2016 talk on architectural road mapping and RCDA. It states, okay, you can implement this at any level in SAFe. That micro architecture microcycle, and also SAFe really blends well with the principles of RCDA, which you see bottom right. So that's, in my opinion, something really important to note, how to implement Agile architecture practice, RCDA, in the context of solution architecture in SAFe. Well, this is one way to do it that works really well in practice. And that's something as a practitioner I can only confirm that it works well when applying it. So we're almost there. Of course, things evolve over time, and there is a cyclic approach in SAFe, a recurrence, because things evolve over time on a yearly basis, let's say 18 months basis, because that's 3 times 6 months. But on that time frame, you should be doing those strategy exercises again, or maybe faster when being provoked by something disruptive or new legislation, and whatever triggers that. Okay, work on that, evolve that list of strategic themes, evolve that portfolio vision, translate it again towards the right amount of operational value streams, and fuel that by means of introducing the right amounts of epics. And as an enterprise architect, you're being asked to participate in that. For that, SAFe has an interesting process called the SAFe Lean Startup Cycle. Very interesting to note. And also, if you're planning to play the part of an enterprise architecture role in SAFe, you should be knowledgeable about it, because in there is that opportunity to create and add the right amount of epic enablers towards the program, so towards the portfolio Kanban. And based on that, on hypothesis, there are some templates on that which you can find on the SAFe site, your SAFe website. You can start with that, moving on your epic from pending on the backlog towards an MVP and a minimal marketable product. And based on that, you're going to continue evolving that epic, or at a certain point in time, you're done. It's being implemented, but the lean startup cycle is there to fuel that. Also, the other important task is there, bottom right, that dispersing those epics and enablers across the arts is also a technique that is described in SAFe, in which, as an architect, you should participate, because, of course, you're empowered. You're the one being knowledgeable about those enablers and why they are there and why they're so important and why they need to be implemented towards that architectural runway. That's the point in time where you should be present to see that things are being dispersed in the right amount of volume. As such, that leads to repetition, and there are the viewpoints and the time intelligence in Sparx that you can introduce to work with that. There are various options in that. There are techniques we can use for that, like time intelligence, like diagram filters. So Sparx has a rich amount of feature to support for that. And also, I'll be using that in the case study. I will document in accompanying this this MDG. So, okay. Couple of minutes left. Some next steps. So for me, it's important to publish the toolkit in a 1.0 version, and I'll publish that one on, of course, on the Sparx community side. It will be free, so I'm really a believer of the open source mentality. Sharing things and giving things also gets a lot of feedback and insights, and also the sharing and getting things back is what I've been doing for recent years. So I will also doing that with this toolkit. And due to the time constraint and the flexibility and how fast this conference came to be, I'm going to commit myself on publishing that toolkit 1.0 by the end of next week on the Sparx community. But as such, I'll give an early preview and I'll post that one on the collaboration side. And so the preview 0.9 will be present and available after this presentation. Due to the fact that we're doing this in a virtual fashion, which is really confident and should be repeated. So I think this is a fantastic way of interacting with the community. So let's make this a tradition. But still, I was a bit missing out on the actual on-premise enterprise users group conferences. So sadly, we had to miss out on London. We have to miss out on Utrecht. And I was really keen on doing a workshop. I'm really thinking about organizing a virtual workshop. So if anyone is interested in participating in that, let me know through the collaboration platform. But I would really like to do a hands-on session for me to start validating things and for you to participate in things and to gain hands-on experience with the toolkit and see if things work out well, and then we can do some tweaking and tuning to get that 1.1 version up and running, so to speak. And also, I'm going to work on some more enterprise architecture, because directly hooking up applications with those value streams. What about blueprints? What about processes? Because an activity in an operational value stream, those things that are processes, what about them? Capabilities, your capability maps as enterprise architect. What should you doing with them? But also working on that, and I'll also be happy to share some content on that in the future. So okay, so let's say to round things up, I'm going to publish the slides on the collaboration platform after this talk. I will be publishing that community preview on the platform after this talk. We're going to have a documented toolkit in the near future. Also with a case study, I'm going to work out a connected stadium as a case study, because of course that reference case in the training, it's interesting, but it's a rather textbook kind of approach. I'm going to translate a real world project that I did in the past and translate that into a reference case. I also did that with the EA for BI framework. Should know about that one. So I've learned over time that proper documentation also helps out with the adoption of that toolkit. So okay, and also should you be interested in a workshop, once again let me know, and we can start organizing things for that. Okay, time flies when you're having fun. I see it's 10:30 European Belgian time. So, and that was also my last slide. So that's interesting time management. I would really like to thank you for your attention. Give some feedback on this presentation, on your experiences as SAFe architects in various roles. And let's see if we can collaborate a bit more on this topic. Once again, thanks for attending this talk, and I hope to see you in the near future and a new and hopefully interesting encounter such as this virtual context. So thanks, and until the next time.
Thank you very much, Rudy. It was a wonderful presentation, and we really appreciate you putting together the whole thing in a very short notice. For people who don't know, like, the whole idea of this conference was just done based on several cancellations, as Rudy mentioned. So a number of conferences were canceled back to back, and then we thought should be a way to engage the community. And the whole thing from idea to implementation was just 3.5 weeks. So we thank all presenters and all participants for kind of, giving your support in such short span of time and making it a huge success so far. We've had a fantastic run so far. And so you mentioned a number of things. I just would like to touch base on a few things before wrapping up. You can share your 0.9 version for now in the Teams channel, but we will have a page for your presentation available, which will be shared to the participants in a few days or in a week's time after the summit is over. That will have your presentation, all the reference materials that you would like to share, information about your notes, and anything that you would like to share above and beyond this presentation. So we'll have a page for you and your session, and that will be conveyed to the participants in due course. So, you can use that as an opportunity to share your 1.0 as well. So that's one thing. And two, you also mentioned about, having feedback or future sessions. There are a number of questions already in the Teams channel to you, and there's a number of comments and feedback already. We would request you to please spend some time in the Teams channel to interact with the people who attended your session and have shared your feedback. I'm already sharing my screen, but I understand we have done our 90 minutes, and we're on time, so it will be better to have a detailed discussion in the Teams platform. And anything that you would like to convey to the users, we have a list of all the attendees, so you can always reach out to us, even post the summit and even post people moving on from the summit. We will be able to convey them to the users. So that's all I wanted to summarize. Again, so thank you very much for your participation, and thanks everyone for your attendance and the feedback. There was also a question that you said, would Prolaborate be interested to discuss with you to make some dashboards and feature requests? Absolutely. That's how Prolaborate was developed. So by interacting with experts and people like you and making, getting an understanding of what's needed firsthand. So of course, we want to make sure, we are working along the same lines as well. So we are having integrations with Jira and Confluence to make sure we have the DevOps and the solution architecture environment seamlessly integrated. So you can have an EA model published to Confluence live, and your Confluence pages gets refreshed every time your EA models gets updated. So there's a lot of work along these lines, and anything that we can do to work together to make the product even better would be really helpful. And it's so kind of you to share this as an open source thing to the entire community. I'm sure people will appreciate the value of such a comprehensive framework being given to them for trial and further evaluation. So once again, thank you very much on behalf of the team and all the participants.
Same to you. Once again, thanks for the opportunity to speak at the conference. Well, let's continue with this. It's the last day, but there's still some interesting content lined up next. So I'm going to follow it. So everyone, big thanks, and until the next time.
Thank you once again.